Hey there! Today we're diving into a really fascinating and, yeah, maybe a little controversial idea. We're looking at the crossroads of history, religion, and science, and asking if there's a hidden link between ancient prophets and psychoactive substances. Let's jump right in.
Let's just put the big question right on the table. What if those profound, world-altering visions we read about in ancient texts weren't just a one-way spiritual download? What if they were sparked, or at least helped along, by a chemical catalyst? It sounds pretty radical, I know, but stick with me because there's some surprisingly compelling evidence to back it up.
Okay, part one. Before we can even begin to answer that question, we got to get our heads into the ancient world. We need to look at the tools they had available. And here's the key thing to realize. For them, psychoactive plants and fungi weren't some weird fringe novelty. Nope, they were common, powerful tools.
And the history here goes incredibly deep. Just take psilocybin, magic mushrooms. We've got evidence of their use in rituals going back thousands of years. It's even thought they spread along ancient trade routes. But let's be super clear. This was not about recreation. The experiences they produced were seen as legitimate encounters with the divine, totally woven into the fabric of their spiritual lives.
And then, of course, you've got cannabis, which was also everywhere for thousands of years. Now, their effects were different, sure. Cannabis, more for introspection, mushrooms for big visions, but both were a normal part of ritual. The bottom line is they were transportable, they were accessible, and people saw them as powerful ways to connect with each other and with the cosmos.
So for part two, let's try a little thought experiment. This is where it gets really interesting. If this stuff was so common, so integrated into their world, what if they just never bothered to write about it? What if their use was just an assumed, invisible part of life?
And this idea right here gets to the absolute heart of the theory. Think about it. When something is truly everywhere, a basic part of your world, you don't write it down. You just assume everybody knows. It's like making a note in your journal. Breathed air today. Of course you did. It's just a giving.
And if we run with that idea, that it's invisible in the text, it totally changes how we read these ancient documents. Suddenly, those ecstatic visions and angelic encounters could be seen as induced altered states. All that wild symbolic language from the prophets? Maybe it's a kind of shared shorthand for these experiences. Even the laws about rituals might have a hidden layer, acting as a set of safety guidelines.
This brings us to part three, where we go from a thought experiment to an actual formal idea, the stoned prophets theory. And yeah, the name's a bit provocative, but the theory itself is serious. It suggests that prophets in the ancient Near East might have used these substances as a key part of their spiritual practice.
Of course, I know what you're thinking. That is a huge claim. It's one thing to speculate, it's a cool idea, but is there any hard physical proof, any actual evidence that this was happening in an ancient Israelite religious setting?
Well, you are not going to believe this, but the answer is yes. In 2020, archaeologists made a groundbreaking discovery at an ancient Judahite shrine called Tel Arad. They found two altars from the 8th century BCE. On one, they found frankincense, pretty standard stuff, but on the other, they found cannabis resin, and it had been mixed with animal dung to help it burn slowly and release its psychoactive compounds.
I mean, this discovery is a complete game changer. We are officially out of the realm of pure theory. This is the first direct physical proof of psychoactives being used in a formal religious ritual in ancient Judah. The cannabis was intentionally prepared to be inhaled, right there on the altar, alongside other sacred substances.
Okay, let's move into part 4 and see how this all comes together. Now that we have this hard archaeological evidence, how does it change the way we read those prophetic visions in the ancient texts? How do we start to reframe them?
Well, we can now look at some of the most famous stories with fresh eyes. Take Ezekiel's incredible vision of wheels within wheels, this complex, mind-bending imagery. Could that be an attempt to describe the indescribable feeling of an altered state? And what about Moses in the burning bush? Suddenly there's a tangible, historical context for how someone might have gotten into that profound visionary state.
What this all really highlights is just a massive gap between their world and ours. For the ancients, these substances were tools for insight, a way to understand the cosmos itself, totally integrated into life. For us, we tend to put them in boxes. They're either for recreation and escape, or they're a tightly controlled medicine. It's just a fundamentally different worldview.
And listen, this is a really important point, so I want to be crystal clear.
The goal here is absolutely not to debunk spiritual insight or diminish anyone's faith. Not at all. The point is to explore and reframe the how, the actual mechanism that people back then might have used to achieve that profound insight.
So we're left with this final, really fascinating question. If we look at prophecy through this lens, does it change it from being just a broadcast from the divine? Does it reframe it as more of a collaboration, a partnership, where human beings use the tools available to them in their world to actively open their minds to a deeper reality? That is a pretty powerful idea to think about.